Hello and welcome to the Austin Jazz Society Conversations with the Hall of Fame. My name is Christian Wiggs. I have served as the producer on this series, and as a part of its mission, the Austin Jazz Society recognizes and honors the legacy of those local individuals who have made a positive contribution to the jazz art form. Each year, the Society nominates and selects candidates to be recognized and inducted into the Austin Jazz Society Hall of Fame. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Society arranged for individual conversations with those living Hall of Famers as a way of capturing their thoughts and influences affecting their love of jazz. We are very thankful to have Rabbi Neil Blumofe, recognized jazz aficionado and historian, conduct these interviews. We hope these interviews will give a sense of commitment, history, contributions, and personal love for America's own art form, jazz.
Well, it is excellent to see you in the capacity too for the Austin Jazz Society, Mr. Koch. And I've known you a long time, and it's really great to be able to share and get to know you a little bit like this, if you don't mind.
It's lovely, and it's always nice to see you. I always get a thrill, really.
Well, thank you, man. And you're when people think about jazz in Austin, synonymous with that is Alex Koch, even though you have taken some time to explore the Netherlands and other places as well. I know you're from Dallas. It would be great, I think, for people to kind of hear what your upbringing was in Dallas and what magnetized you to Austin, Texas, and what you discovered when you got here.
Well, that's a long story. I'll try to make it short. One of my big influences was my mother, because she used to sing songs, and we'd go to the store. She'd make up a little song about us going to the store. And we had lullabies and things, and she had instruments around the house. We had a piano around the house, so nobody really played it, but there was a girl from across the street that would come over and play. My father would, back in the days when the neighborhoods, you knew all your neighbors. You could just, when I was very young, I could just walk across two streets. It was kind of a big deal. And then the lady would go, she'd give me some milk and cookies and say hi to your folks, and then send me home, and that would, getting out in the world like that. So we were always encouraged to do that. My father liked music, but he didn't play. He claimed to play harmonica. So there was a harmonica at the house that he claimed he used to have. So I play on that. That was fun. All these little kid things you could do, like just play on the piano and make up stories or harmonica, stuff like that. And
so that's in Dallas.
I ended up in Austin down at St. Stephen's, which had no band department. So we had a little rock band and and a folk song singing band. And my first gig, I think, really that paid. We played Good Shepherd Church back like 1969, maybe something like that. We played the Holiday Inn there on the river. I played with a bass player, guitar, singer, friend of mine named Steve Monis, who I still keep up with, and a singer, guitarist, Karen Cummings, who I still hear from every couple of years.
And so you came here, was that after high school, or was that during high school?
That was high school, 9th grade. I was in, Dallas, we were very lucky. I guess I should have started there. And I was trying to jump ahead so it wouldn't take too long. We were very lucky.
Time, brother. It's your time. Take it.
We were very lucky that we had music and arts in the school systems then. This was way before pass play, no pass, no play, that kind of thing. So, and the school I was at, I think I started in 4th grade. You had Monday, you had art, Tuesday you had choir, Wednesday you had band, Thursday you had drama, and then the next year you had to pick which one you liked the best. So they were really exposing you to the arts, which I don't know that that really happens here so much anymore. But I just gravitated towards band. I was in the band with my best friend at the time, and I said, "What are you going to play?" He goes, "I'm going to play the flute." And I thought, "Flute? Well, what the heck? You know, why are you going to play that?" He goes, "Well, it's really small. We can carry it around with us real easy, and it's easy to just leave in a locker." So I took flute too, and he lasted maybe 1 or 2 years, and I just kept with him. So and I love the band director. His name was Mario Foster. I think he had played with Glenn Miller at one point. And the big thrill was he played in the State Fair band. So on Fair Day, which we all got in Texas at the time, I don't know that they still do that. Certainly not when we don't have the fair. But you know, we used to get out of school to go to Fair Day, and he'd be marching in the band, and we just thought that was the coolest thing. You know, he played clarinet, and he was just I had a half-hour lesson every week. I just really liked him. You know, I liked his whole trip. You know, and um, and then when I came down to St. Stephen's, there was no band. It was a boarding school, so I was boarding away from home. And my mother said, "Well, maybe you'll. Why don't I get you a flute and you can play on the flute, and we'll rent to buy. If you don't like it, no problem, but you might like it." Because I was kind of lonely, being away from home like that. And I sort of took to it and played with the radio and started playing. And my friends back home were playing. My good friend Stoney Savage, who runs Stoney's Wine Bar in Dallas now, and he used to book the Dallas at the Dallas Museum of Art. They had a jazz festival every year, and he used to book that. And he's been a bass player, and we started playing. And another friend of mine, Jim Long, played vibes, and so I got introduced to early kind of music of Coltrane and Gary Burton when he had Larry Coryell and early records like that. And I just loved them. And I always had a thing for English blues. I loved John Mayall, and it started I started seeing, wow, John Mayall's band just all left and they became Fleetwood Mac. And then, oh, John Mayall's guitar player just left and he just formed a band called the Yardbirds. And then John Mayall's flute player had a flute sax player in there. He just left and they formed Mark Almond. So I was real paying attention to that kind of stuff. And I love the saxophone players, guitar players. So I buy Johnny Almond's first record, who had split from John Mayall. And the very first tune is called 2RK. And I'm thinking, RK. And then I look at the liner notes, it's talks Roland Kirk. And Roland Kirk is the baddest, and I'm listening to it, and it starts out, it's like this blues thing, humming and singing and just really playing. So later I'm in high school, and we all find out about Jethro Tull, especially all my friends, because they know I'm kind of interested in the flute, and they're going, "Oh, you heard this band, Jethro Tull?" "Oh yeah." So I get the record. The very first tune on there, Serenade to a Cuckoo by Rahsaan Roland Kirk. And at that point, I'm just thinking, this is like 1969 or so. I'm thinking, I got to find out who this Roland Kirk guy is. I go down to the record store, and they were going out of business. So they were selling all their records. So I think all the records were like $1, $2. I bought every single Roland Kirk record I could find. I think it was before he was Rahsaan Roland Kirk. And I don't think, other than a few friends hanging out late at night listening to rock and roll, that was it for me. It was just jazz. Because Rahsaan is such a evangelist for the music, for Black classical music. When you heard Rahsaan, he would, write about Coltrane, or he'd talk about Charlie Parker or Dolphy, or he had tunes for Dolphy. He had tunes for all those people. So it was like I don't know if you ever, as a kid, like traded baseball cards or something.
Sure.
And so back then, when you actually bought records, they had liner notes. You check out, oh, that bass player played with Rasan. And then or that piano player, I like that piano player. Oh yeah, he's playing with so-and-so, and which is how I discovered Ornette, because Ornette did a record with Coltrane's rhythm section,
Hmm.
with Elvin Jones and Jimmy Garrison.
Mhm.
So, I mean, one thing just led to another. But at that point, I was thinking I was knowing a lot about music, sort of. I was learning very quickly, but now I look back on it, I know very little about music. I mean, anything about rock music, pop music, disco, I have no idea. Like I watched who was it? Clive Davis thing on Netscape the other night.
Mhm.
He's going through all the artists he had and all the top hits and everything. And of course, I'm sort of aware of the hits, but really, I don't know anything about any of that stuff.
And how's that make you feel?
Well, I have a lot to learn.
And do you feel like you want to learn it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the fact that it's history. I mean, music has opened up a lot of doors, as anything that you study. When I go into schools and I do like the Austin Jazz Workshop, it's not always, well, you got to learn music. It's like you got to follow your interest, and your interest will always take you places. So music to me has really opened up the doors to history and geography. And now even, through this pop music and stuff, a lot of pop culture and stuff that I was pretty well unaware of all through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And when I hear younger players today, that are coming out of UT, you hear these influences in really great ways. And I'm thinking, wow, what's that? And then, they're listening to, I don't know, I still don't know that much about contemporary pop music.
Well, you've been in Austin, so you haven't, you're telling me you came here to St. Stephen's at high school and you haven't really left. I mean, you kind of made it your headquarters since then?
I always leave, but I always come back.
Right,
I mean, I went to college in University of Colorado, Boulder.
right.
I really wanted to go to San Francisco State, because I just heard that was where the stuff was. And I knew there was a lot of, psychedelic and rock, and at that time, a lot of the music, the rock and roll, I wasn't totally into jazz. I was still listening to some rock and but also, not only that, I mean, that's where Rasan was, and the Kim Kesey bus and all those things. So I knew there was a lot of jazz out there too. And I mean, that's another story of naivety in a certain way. But but back then it was I don't know if you remember this guy, S.I. Hayakawa. He was the president of the school, and he was a little bit of a lefty, especially for Texas. Dallas, my father goes, you're not going there. You can go anywhere else. And I picked Boulder, University of Boulder. I applied at Hart Music School. I applied at a couple of other places. I didn't want to go to North Texas because I wanted to get out of the state. I wanted to travel, get a little further away.
Sure.
And one of my best friends at the time, Dave Parker, we moved up there as roommates together, and in Boulder. And it was actually a hotbed at the time. I mean, there were people from both sides of the coast, and there was a good little jazz scene going on, and a good music scene. And we got to play a lot. And I got to play for, in the university, I got to play for dance classes, and that had to do with improvisation and reading. So that just
And,
fit me to a T.
oh, that sounds exactly right. And after Boulder, you came back to Austin?
I came back to Austin. I graduated in what was it? 77. 76 actually. The winter of 76. I came back in 77. I'd already met Rich Harney through my friend Stoney Savage. And Rich, I was on vacation or something. I came down here, and Rich had a room in this house up on Castle Hill, here in Austin. And Stoney had been telling me about him. We'd been in touch, and he goes, "You got to meet this guy. You're going to love him." And sure enough, we just woke up. We had a cup of coffee and just took the coffee cups right to the piano and started playing.
Mm.
And it just worked, you know, it never stopped working. So that's how I met Rich. When I moved back in 77, I really thought, okay, I got a degree. I mean, things were cheap in Austin. That's the thing you really, my rent was $45. And I had a Volkswagen Bug. It cost, I think, about $3 to fill it up with gas, you know.
Wow.
Um, and I remember, you know, sitting around thinking, I'm going to try this music thing. I had gigs, you know, with Rich and a couple of other places. We had some gigs, and it 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 wasn't hard. We worked this little place called the Potpourri that was on Guadalupe, across from the state school or the
Okay.
hospital there,
Mhm.
and it was a cafeteria. So people would come down the cafeteria line, pay their thing, walk into the next room, and right through the doorway was the piano and a tip jar. So Rich and I are playing, and that woman, bless her heart, Virginia, she fed us every day we played there. You know, that was part of it. And we kept our tips. And we made, I don't know, $15 maybe a piece a day. So there's your rent in 3 days.
Hmm.
And we did that gig 5 days a week, you know. that was because that was our breakfast, you know. We'd go down there, and then we come back to the place. I guess at that point we were living together for a minute. We had a room in a house up by Kirby Lane,
Mhm.
and then practice. And then we'd often have a gig that night, most of the time. And then we'd go to the gig. And then the next day, wake up, go down, play the gig. I mean, you know, have breakfast, play for a couple of hours. We had a real book. I had a real book, and Rich had written tunes. So we'd play Rich's tunes, and then we'd play out of the real book. And we'd just wake up, play music, have lunch or breakfast for us
Yep.
at about 2 p.m, come back home, practice, and then go to the next gig. So, I mean, we were like kings. I mean, in Austin back then, I remember really more than once going to a place like El Arroyo, we used to really like. And I'd go in there, and somebody would go, "Oh man, I heard your band last night. Here, lunch is on me."
Wow.
That was not really uncommon, you know. It was just, I mean, for all musicians in Austin, it was just a lovely place. You know, it was a cheap place to live, and you could afford to play music. And you know, I remember I heard about Tomas when I was in high school, and I was always very naive about things. And I remember just calling up some club. You know, somebody said, "Yeah, Tomas plays down here." I can't remember the name of the place. It became many places over the years. It might have been the Black Door at that time. I can't remember, but and I said, "Hi, is Tomas Ramirez playing there tonight?" And of course, the guy's going, "Huh? Who?" But I just figured, man, Tomas, everybody must know who Tomas is. You know, that was just my thinking and feeling at the time. You know, in high school, I just thought, wow, that music is so great, so strong, that of course everybody knows.
Sure. Now you're a fellow traveler with Rich, and a friendship that lasted over 40 years, and other fellow travelers, astral travelers as well. I know you and Tina Marsh were connected in a beautiful way. I'd love to hear how you met her and how you connected to her Creative Opportunity Orchestra, and just imprints in the city based on your collaboration as well.
Well, I mean, that's just a lovely. Um, I was working a lot with Rich at the time, and I had a couple of other things. I would. I mean, I feel like I was always lucky being like the second or third call for a lot of bands, and so that was plenty of work. And generally, you kind of had to be in about 10 bands. And if you worked kind of with 10 different bands, it was pretty easy to make a living, because you were always, they didn't all work all the time. So I had that at one point, you know, 10 different groups, And we were just looking to do something kind of different. And Tina came down to the gig. I think we might have been playing at the Hole in the Wall. Oh man. I don't know how we just started talking, but we started talking about Ornette Coleman and free music. And she lived over in a place called on Ashwood at the time, over near Delwood there. And so we started to get together and play once a week at that place. Oh, it was her boyfriend at the time, Booka Michael. That's because I had played with Booka somehow in some kind of different bands, and he said, "Let's get together and play." So, and at the time, Horacio Rodriguez was in town with playing at the Treehouse with some guys from Switzerland that had come over, and he wanted to play some free music. And he, being from Europe and Argentina, he knew, probably had more experience with it than we did actually at the time. And so we got together with Booka. It was just a trio. And no, Rock Savage was there too. That's right, on drums. Because I'd known Rock for a long, I went to high school with Rock. And we're just improvising, maybe playing an Ornette tune or one of Rock's tunes. And we hear this voice. And we're on the second floor. We hear, "What's that voice?" And we open to the door, and it's Tina singing in the hallway, in the stairway, just singing along with us. And we said, "Well, just come on up and sing with us." And so that was another one. We just started playing together, and it never stopped. And so she moved. Booka's brother, Carl Michael, was in town. He was a good writer, a good arranger, nice guitar player. And together with Tina, he helped to start write the first grants. As in my memory, they're the two that really started that group. And we had a grant. I remember we had to play at the Paramount Theater for a couple of nights. It was packed both nights. I think it was a free show. We played through the Green Sheets. I think most of us were in the Union at the time. And so we had kind of that was the group. And those rehearsals, man, those were ridiculous. They'd go for 6-7 hours. And people would go do a gig. I remember like going to do a gig and then coming back and the rehearsal was still going on.
Wow.
Because none of us had those real good skills of writing. I mean, in the beginning. And we were just wanted to experiment. And that's exactly what it was. Let's all write music and try it. And we were all enthusiastic about, what people were doing. We were all exploring in our own ways. And it was just open forum. And I think the second or third year of that, John Mills came in. And then it got much, much better. There was somebody that actually knew how to write and knew how to rehearse. And Randy Zimmerman, the same, he came into the band, and those guys were not going to rehearse for 6 hours. And, I mean, they were way too busy for one, and they didn't need to. And so through Mills and Randy, I learned a little bit about rehearsing, and how to not just spend all single day working on a tune, and also show up with something a little more prepared than just, let's try this and see how it sounds. And no, could you change that note? Spend a whole day of composing it together.
Sure.
Well, those were really nice days too, because we had a lot of people that played so well, but really didn't read music and couldn't really write music, but they had musical ideas. And so it had a different kind of an energy and a different kind of a community feel to it.
Alex, that's so interesting because you strike me, and I've gotten to know you as a man that I respect with your erudition, with your perspective, with your wisdom. And I love hearing this incredible glee and joy about immersing yourself wholly in improvisation. And it sounds like you were such a indelible part of this Austin scene. Why did you leave, man? Like, what happened? What was calling you in the Netherlands?
Well, I mean, during this is around the mid 70s or so. Let me think about this for a second. Early 70s. Well, mid 70s. I'm really bad at this. You probably, there's a lot of people that can do dates much better than me. I'm really not good with dates. But I do in the mid to late 70s. I was partnered up with Mary Ishinaga, who was a sound engineer. She was an engineer. She worked at KUT. So I knew a lot of those people at KUT and KLRU. We just all hung out and we used to play the fundraisers. And I mean, it was just great. You could just go down to KUT after the gig and hang out and just talk to Paul Ray or talk to whoever was doing the show. And they were, yeah, come on in. It was really quite a different era. And Mary at the time, um, she really liked audio engineering, and she got a job and a grant to study and learn more about audio engineering. And she got a job at National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. And I, I I thought this would be a great opportunity to get out of town and go to a little more urban type of setting, because there were a lot of jazz players. Duke Ellington's from DC, and it's pretty famous for a lot of its players, Charlie Rouse and Keter Betts and on and on. Anyway, and so and we were very close. We had a very good thing going, and I said, okay, I'll come up there. I went up on a vacation. I said, I'll come up, and as soon as I have a couple of days off from work. Well, this was funny because back then we never had a day off. I swear I think we played 7 months without a day off. I mean, if it wasn't lunch, breakfast, dinner, night, after hours. I mean, we did have an after hours club here that was open and so there were a lot of gigs there. We had the house gig there on, I think, Thursday nights, and often sometimes for the weekend. But I mean, we were so I went up to DC anyway, and I thought this is a great musical environment, and I wanted to try it. There was probably a moment, things come and go. So even though we had worked 7 months in a row, then it probably started getting slower. And to us, slower might be 2 nights off a week or something. I don't know, at the time, we had a lot more energy. But I went up there, and then I decided, well, okay, I'll move up there. And the year before I moved, I thought, man, I better learn how to read a little bit, because Bob Meyer had just come from Florida. He was running the UT band, and I knew him, and I said, man, I'd really, do you need a tenor player? I mean, I'm not going to go back to school, but I'll come to be in the band. And a few days later, he goes, well, we don't have a tenor player. I mean, can you imagine, UT, no second tenor player? They can't find a second guy. I mean, what luck is that for me? And so I said, no, I need to get I need to learn how to read, and I want to be exposed to, reading music. And so he said, okay, but you can't miss. You can't just come and go. I had a better attendance record, I think, than most anybody else in that band. There were probably good. Greg Wilson was in that band. It was just, and I have a friendship with him ever since. And the same thing happened with the Austin, Austin Community College band, the ACC band. Robert Wilson used to run that band. And somebody came up to me at a gig. I think it was Steve Fleckman, maybe, came up and said, hey, we could use a tenor player. Would you be interested in coming down and playing and auditioning? And I did. I couldn't read. I mean, I'm still not the greatest reader, but the solo was okay. And they wanted a soloist. So I was for that year before I moved to DC, I was in 2 different big bands, just trying every day. So there's a couple of days at UT, a day over at ACC, all the other gigs, and, still doing it. And moved up to DC. I drove up, packed up my stuff. we get to DC, and Mary's living right on DuPont Circle, which is just fabulous. So the first thing I do is I just find all the names of the big bands. I look it up in the city paper, and I call all the leaders and I say, I just got to town. If you need anybody to sub, I'll come in and do it for free, just for a rehearsal. I just want to meet some people. In about a week, these guys called me and said, we're going to play at a camp for children that are disabled. And it's just this gig we do every year, but would you want to come? Because it doesn't pay. And so I say, well, I need a ride. I get in the car with the guitar player. Guitar player is Kenny DeFinis, who has a rhythm and blues band, and the trombone player was John Wolfe. And we do the gig. It's fun, and we go back. We're getting the car, go back. He goes, oh, I know this jam session. Kenny goes, I know a jam session on Thursday night at the place called the Child Herald. And it's right near DuPont Circle. So, it'll be close enough to your place. So we go down to the Child Herald and play, and I play. And somehow, it came out that I had just got there. I was from Texas. So everybody just assumed that I played blues. And somebody, I don't know where this rumor got started, somebody a year or so later came up to me and goes, when you showed up there, we all thought that you had just got off Lloyd Price's band. I don't know where that, but it's late, and you're young and there's a lot of alcohol and whatnot going on. And honestly, at the time, I didn't really know anything hardly about Lloyd Price. But so that at the end of that night, I was in 3 bands, youth bands that, just started to work. They'd work a couple of times a month, maybe. So I got my foot in the door. But the best thing, we were living in this place in DC, and I'm practicing one day, and I hear this knock on the door, and it's this elderly gentleman, Lawrence Wheatley, who was in DC for many, many years and ran a jam session at the One Step Down, and he lived a few floors below. And he goes, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And we jammed a little bit. He had a piano in his place. And he goes, I know this, a friend of mine who's just here. He just finished college and he's back. And I think y'all would get along really well. So why don't you come over for dinner next week? And I'll invite him too. He's a guitar player. I go down and it's Paul Ballenbach, the guitar player who's gone on with, he played with Joey Del Francesco for many years. Anyway, and we hit it off right away and we just start gigging around town. I mean, it was just, it's so lucky when I look back on it, but we're so enthusiastic to play. And during that time, during that year, the Creative Opportunity Orchestra was still going on. And so we'd come back to Texas to see the folks, a couple of times a year, and always do gigs with Rich and do gigs with Tina. And Tina was getting that thing really rolling. And we made our first record, the new Visions Ensemble then, that I don't know the date on it, is 80, 81 or something like that. And that was with Rock, Buka Michael, Rock Savage, Horacio Rodriguez, myself and Tina, and basically doing kind of Old and New Dreams, because we'd seen Old and New Dreams at the Armadillo. And that was our model. We just loved that. Sometimes we'd paint our faces up like Chicago Art Ensemble. I mean, we were totally into that style. And then I asked 2 friends of mine to come down and play piano. One was James Wagner, who's since passed on, but I knew him from high school, but he was fantastic. He had a gig at the Red Tomato, I think, for years and years, just playing solo. But he would also play things like Beethoven sonatas and improvise on them, like just start playing them and then playing them.
Wow.
And he was very free in that way. But what a great pianist. Wow. He was really good. And both I and Rich really looked up to him. So that, the fact that he came down and played on our record was really something. And Rich came and played on one tune too. They each played on one tune. So that's kind of, and then the orchestra kept going. From DC, I joined a band called the Washington Jazz Battalion, which was led by a trombonist named Bob Israel, who is also now runs Blues Alley up there.
Mhm.
But so he had a big band, and we had a weekly gig down in this big square outside. That was nice. Charlie Young was on that gig. Man, there were some good musicians on that gig. And Paul was on that gig, Paul Ballenbach. And then my father passed away. I remember we played that night. That just had to play. I mean, that was the thing that I felt it really saved me at the moment. But we were already thinking about packing up. The reason being that my brother lived in France. He'd moved to France years ago, and years before this. And he said, I just bought an apartment downstairs, this rez-de-chaussée. It used to be a horse stall, but they had sort of fixed it up. And he goes, would you like to come and live here for a year? And I thought, yeah, live in Paris for a year, because I definitely had that, expatriate, American expat jazz thing.
Mhm.
I just, I knew, and when I graduated from college, my present was a ticket to Europe, a round trip ticket. So I went over on, the cheap one that went through Greenland. And, you couldn't get off the plane, but it stopped there, and that effectively made it kind of cheap. And I had a backpack and a tent, and I was there for 4 months, just going around and going to jazz festivals and all the jazz, everything I could. And I met up with my buddy Andy Wilder. We played a lot of little gigs. He plays piano. And he's actually the pianist that played at Rich's memorial there at the Elephant, and played at one of Rich's weddings. So, I mean, I had a real good feeling about Europe. I wanted to do that.
Mm. So how'd you get from Paris to the Netherlands?
Well, we moved. I came back to Austin in between all that. I mean, it's just been back and forth, Neil. I mean, I was in Paris for a year, and from Paris, Paul called me up again. We got the gig with the Washington Jazz Battalion. It got me to the Canary Islands, where we played for 6 weeks in this band. So from the Canaries, I figured, okay, that's close enough. And I got to Paris, and I was living right around the corner from Steve Lacy. He's one of my biggest influence, and he was such a sweet man, such a nice man to me. I mean, every time I'd talk to him or go to his house, or we would play, or, and so from Paris, I was there, and I was calling Paul, and I was going, man, you got to come to Europe, because, we were working little restaurants, but I mean, it was there were jazz societies everywhere, and they'd feed you so well, and it was something that, it might not have paid a lot, but these guys, you'd go to this place, and they would go, this is one of our best wines. So, and it was always like, we want you to have the best. And consequently, we always wanted to play our best. I mean, if we weren't playing our best, we would just, that really was our job, just to do the very best and reciprocate, And that was one of the things I just loved about that, not just to go in and punch the clock and, you got to fill up this much time and sell this much beer, but it was really like, we really felt respected, as musicians, and they wanted to know about the music. We're in the 80s here, and, jazz was really still big in France. It was a liberator's music, and and it was really, it was really fun to play, and with those guys. And I called Pepe Gonzalez, who I'd played with in DC, and Paul. I said, man, you gotta come over here. This is just great. And Pepe had an aunt in Torre del Mar. And he said, my aunt has this apartment. She'll rent it to us. She rented this apartment. I think it was about $90 a month or something, which was a lot of that. But there were 3 of us. So we were each paying 30, you know. It was like we moved down there. And that's a whole nother story. That would take another hour to tell you all the stuff that happened there. But so we stayed in Torre del Mar near Sevilla. It's actually near Malaga. And we didn't have a phone. We didn't have hot water, but it didn't matter that much. Somehow people heard about us, and we got this weekly gig every Friday and Saturday night in Malaga. So I had a car. We've been playing a Mark Cross at one of the big department stores. They had this big festival for a week in Paris, and I played, and the drummer said, okay, well, we're making this much money, so I'll tell you what, I'll give you this much money and you buy my car from me. And I had a car to drive down to Spain. So we had a car and we could drive around. It was a little, they call it a 4 you know, four pistons in there. It was kind of like a powerful lawnmower engine. But it would get the bass and the guitar, and it would get us up to Madrid to play, and it would get us over to Sevilla, and it would get us, you know, it would get us around. So we did that, and then those guys, you know, they got kind of homesick, and I'd been over there about 2 years at that time, you know, a year in Paris and then a year down in Spain. I started getting a little lonely. I mean, the rent, the place where we were renting, I think this aunt maybe sold the apartment or something. So I lived in Madrid with Mary Ashnaga for a few months. And it got cold. We were living in a drummer's grandmother's apartment who had passed away. And it was this beautiful, beautiful place, like with marble floors but no furniture. We had a mattress, you know, and it was, and we met, you know, several, Miguel Chastang and some of the guys that were playing a lot in Madrid. And I played a lot in Madrid and spent a couple of, and they were great because you do a week or 2 weeks sometimes at a club. That would be the gig, like the old days here in the States. So I would go down to Sevilla and I would be a month, play 2 weeks at one club and at another club. And that's how I met Abdou Salim, a fantastic tenor player from Texas, of all places, anyway. But I got, you know, we got a little homesick, and we kept hearing about Tina, and we got to take this music back, you know, to Texas. We got to take this back, and we got to be in, you know, play with Tina, and because that seemed like really something that was ongoing. I was missing Rich, you know, and because Paul and Pepe had moved away, and so we moved back and did that for quite a while. And then the collective came. I didn't really, I didn't know those guys. I met Sean Barracan. He was the first Dutch person I met at Liberty Lunch back in those days. He was here. He had an ex-wife here, and he came here to see his daughter. And we played a gig, and he was this big, huge, imposing tenor player, flute player, you know, played the same, you know, instruments. And he's like poking me, you got to come to Amsterdam. You would do good, you know. So it was always in my mind to go. And at one point when I was living in Paris, we got a rail pass because we wanted to see some of Europe. And Amsterdam, we stayed with Sean at Sean's place, and Sean had left the place because his current partner was having his second child, so he was off at the birth, and we had the apartment. And he gave me his gig at the Engelbewaarder, which is a fantastic place in Amsterdam. So that was my introduction to that in the 80s. And he said, yeah, you know, the Willem Broker collective office, it's right down the street. But, you know, I knew who they were, and I'd heard recordings, but I was too shy to really just knock on the door or anything. And somehow, anyway, there's these so long stories, Neil, you know, but they're so personable, and they're just so full of like being in the right place. And
it's so inspiring. Tell me, I've heard you play for a long time, and I've been so moved by your spirit and by your gentle soul. What does the word improvisation mean to you?
Well, you know, what is today? Today's Wednesday, so it means it means making it up as we go along. Um, I mean, kind of, it means going with the flow.
So much of what you've described at least doesn't exist, at least in Austin anymore. For somebody coming up,
I don't know. I don't know about that.
well, certainly the kind of living is not the same. It's not
It's
$3 to fill up your Volkswagen Bug, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's impossible.
So, somebody coming up who's got the same love of life that you do, and has got the same sort of open-mindedness and curiosity about the world, what advice would you give them now for somebody who is looking to explore in the beautiful, holy ways that you have?
That's a really hard one because it's such a personal thing. And for me, I've always felt like I believe in the music. I mean, in DC, I would meet these guys and I know they would live or die for the music. I mean, and I'm not kidding you. They would, they did a lot of sacrifice. I used to think, oh yeah, John Coltrane, he must have been a multimillionaire, like Bill Gates. Or I would go down and like Webster Young lived around the corner. And I thought, oh, Webster Young, that guy's famous, or, he must just be, but he wasn't well off, he was in a little tiny apartment and at the time when I met him and playing, with Abersol Records. And then he kind of got, it was a comeback for him for a moment, but it wasn't any kind of thing. And I'd run into these people, I'd run into all sorts of musicians, I mean, throughout the world, but I was a real firm believer in the music, spiritually, that was definitely my religion. That was, do you want to go to a party or do you want to go to a jam session? I mean, there was never any question in my mind what, those choices were just easy for me. And at the time, it didn't feel like a lot of sacrifice. But I mean, looking at it later, yeah, I mean, you're not really ready to support a family. You're not really ready to settle down. You're not, all you're doing is just going from one gig to another. You're not even, I was just lucky to be in a really good relationship with somebody that grew up in the military, whose father was always away and was used to not just having somebody there all the time, that was used to a lot of coming and going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's not even all about music. It's like I said, when I'm with the Austin the jazz workshop, we go into schools and you just talk to kids and you try to inspire them. I mean, I know that the purpose of the jazz workshop is to get people to go into the bands, and it's supposed to be music. But for me, I think it's really greater. I mean, you have to just follow your passion and you have to really believe in that. And I always did, I thought I want to be a professional musician. What do professionals do? Well, most people go to work for 8 hours a day. So I tried to put the clock on and I tried to practice for 8 hours a day and do gigs, or, make sure I got that time in. I mean, I did all those things like, okay, I know the gigs are at 9:30. So I tried to find a place where I could live, where I could practice at 9:30 to 1:30 if I didn't have a gig. It was kind of creative visualization of what you think is going on and where your passion lays there. I don't know. I mean, I can't give anybody any advice, I feel like, because it was so different. But I do feel like most of the time, if people do follow their passions, they'll fall, their passions will show up. If you're not really hunting it constantly, you're going to miss one here or there. And if you keep your eyes open, And it's just like when parents ask me, what do you think my, well, that's not so cool for my kid to be a professional musician. And my answer is always, if that's what they want to do, you're not stopping them. I mean, they're going to do it. And if it's not really what they want to do, they'll find something else.
Hmm. What, Alex, you've got such a beautiful bevy of experiences and amazing friendships in Austin, and certainly memories in Austin for sure. What brings you hope in these days?
People. I really, I mean, there were many years ago, I just sort of remember getting on this kick, and I said, and, of course, there are other things in the world and people. I mean, I saw a great thing on trees. Do trees have friendship, and trees intertwine, and plants and animals? But I mean, people for me were always, that was the most important thing in a way, because those were the friendships that were really going to last. I mean, that was the real value in life.
And do you feel that you still have a full complement of those friendships now in these days?
I feel incredibly lucky, that like with Andy Weil, I've sort of reconnected with a lot of people. And one thing about music too is that you meet somebody and then you don't see them for 10 years, and then you're on the bandstand. It's like, wow, it like that 10 years doesn't really count on your relationship there in a certain way.
Sure.
And hopefully you've improved. And so you tell these stories about what's been going on through the music as you play, and you just take joy in that, hearing, where somebody's come from and where they are. And that was always my point in leaving town, that I always felt I would come back to Austin. And I always left in order to bring something back, to find some music and bring it back and try to utilize it.
And after things resume to a degree that they do you see yourself staying here? Do you see yourself exploring more and bringing back more opportunities and gifts and music that you've had the opportunity to delve into?
I hope so, but one thing that I did learn being in Europe for so many years is that everything that I really loved there and that I celebrated, you find right here at home. All in a way. I mean, you're not playing festivals where you're opening for Ornette Coleman. That's not really. But I mean, people here, they're playing, they're opening, like John Mills opening for Eric Clapton. And there's tons of. I mean, it's really interesting if you were just to be in a very small place like we have been, how much wonderful and beauty there is in a small space. I mean, you don't have to go out and look for it in a certain way because it's all around you. That's something that I've learned. I mean, I can't wait to go back to Europe, but it's almost like you can't step in the same stream twice. I mean, I learned that when I went back the last time for 10 years, and I was playing with the collective, and I was playing with what was left of the collective and playing with different stuff. And you have a lot of young people coming up, like here in Austin, that are so good, and they just have that fire. You can see it, guys like Daniel DeFore or you can hear it and you can see it. And that's it's a kind of a youthful fire, which I don't quite, have that same intensity that I used to have, and I think that's the way it should be. I mean, there would be something wrong if, I felt exactly the same way I did it, 19 and 20. I mean, I still feel the same way about playing, but it is different, and it's a little bit different story. And, you get a little arthritis and, it's you can't do the same stuff, you know. I wish I could. That would be great, but
Well, just as the Parisians offered you their finest wine, perhaps the time is that you are our finest wine at this point.
I love teaching. I really do. I love sharing, um, not just as a, you know, not just anybody, you know, not just to have people come in and out the door all day long, but if somebody's interested in the music, yeah, that's just the most wonderful thing. And I'm working over the last summer. I came up with this idea about cycles, and like the cycle of force, you know, for musicians, the cycle of fifths. Coltrane and Yusef Lateef had an incredible circle where all the things were interconnected. Steve Lacy has his own circle. He's called it the magic circle of ways to go around and practice things in different shapes and forms. So I've been really thinking about that, and I've finally got it to where I think, you know, it's like research and development that I'm trying it out on some of my students, and just to, I don't know, it's interesting. We might have to talk about that in about 10 years.
That's just fine. I'd be happy to, and in between as well. What wisdom, what advice, what blessing, if you will, do you want to offer in this particular moment that highlights and appreciates you as a holy being, as a person who has brought such gifts and uplift to Austin, just one of our revered teachers and musicians? No pressure, by the way.
Yeah, like, who are you talking to? I think Neil's saying something to you.
Well, you certainly have inspired me. And if there's anything top of mind, just for posterity's sake, that would be great. If not, just know that I and so many people love you and are cheering for you and appreciate the beautiful gifts and music that you've shared.
Yeah, I guess I can say that playing in Austin in the 70s and 80s really did prepare me for a lot. Austin, and who knows what it'll be like after this pandemic, but it's always had a lot of different opportunities. There's been many types and styles of music, and that's what really prepared me to go out in the world and be able to do, you know, like with the collectif that also played a lot of different styles of music, or kind of you jump in with somebody. So just to keep your mind open. I wish my mind had been more open when I was younger, but I mean, I was as busy as I could be. But you keep your mind open, take all your opportunities, play as much, keep the reed wet if you're a saxophone player, you know, immerse yourself into your passions, you know, whatever. And every you know, every turn you take, there's some learning to be made. I mean, it's just amazing, you know.
And are you an advocate for those 6-hour rehearsals again, or no?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, this is another thing which I'm currently struggling with, being, you know, that now I have a house, I have a place to live. It's not as imperative to make that $50, $60, $75. And also, it's not that much, you know, to do that. But I've rejoined the musicians union here, and I'm a firm believer in musicians getting paid, and that's quite a quandary, you know, for trying to, I mean, when we played all those restaurant gigs, we weren't making union scale, but we used to have somebody that would come and, you know, tell us we should join, which I haven't seen that so much in a long time here, you know. And that's just a terribly difficult thing, is how to make money. I mean, you brought it up earlier, you know, what would I tell somebody, you know, because when I grew up here, growing up, and you make your rent in 3 days, that's unheard. I mean, you can't pay your rent. I mean, you need what, at least $200, $300 a gig to do that these days. I mean, more for a lot of places. But I mean, even for the young people that are staying in very cheap housing and, you know, not that great of, I mean, our places weren't mansions, of course, but they were affordable. But even for places like that, I think their rent, you need $200 a gig. And so I don't know how we get to that point. I mean, I feel like I need to, what I want to do is help make that noticed and try to, when we come back from the pandemic, I just have a feeling the clubs are going to be going, oh, you know, we just barely meet it. Can you play here for free? You know, we'll give you a place for exposure. But the musicians also, you know, we haven't been playing. They haven't been playing.
Right.
And that's just going to be an age-old thing. And it's funny how, you know, I don't know how that's going to shape up, but I'd like to be able to do something positive so that musicians do get paid and feel right in asking to get paid.
For
Because
sure.
most of the time we just say, I always just said yes. And then there was a point where I just didn't say yes quite as much because I could make a choice to say no. But I know people don't have that choice. And I don't, you know, that's all over the world. That's not just Austin. That's everywhere I've ever been.
Well, Alex, it's been incredible to hear about your story, your life, your chapters, and your wisdom, and to offer you a blessing for continued inspiration and healthy chops and opportunities to share your love and joy with all whom you meet. So thank you very, very much.
I hope we get together for a coffee at least 6 feet apart soon.
Well, I'd like that very much, Alex.